crucial moment in the racial history of the whole Atlantic world and of the world is Christopher Columbus, but not the first voyage, which everybody knows about, but the third voyage in 1498. Columbus sailed south to Sierra Leone, where, as he noticed, the people are very black, perfectly black. And then he sailed due west from Sierra Leone, and he wound up near Trinidad and the northern coast of South America. And he reported that the people there were white with blonde hair. And that shouldn't have happened according to the prevailing theories of skin color in the whole classical world in the medieval period. What happened with Columbus is that people started to realize that you could stay on the same latitude and get radically different skin colors. And if that was the case, then there had to be some other explanation for skin color other than geography. So that's where you begin to get the emergence of biological theories of difference in skin color. And that leads eventually to racist theories of differences in skin color.
Before the idea of race emerged in the U.S., European scientist Carolus Linnaeus published a classification system in Systema Naturae in 1758 that was applied to humans.
Darwin's book on human evolution, The Descent of Man, revealed him as what Dr. John West calls a virulent racist.
He did write extensively about how evolution by natural selection creates unequal races, and that in the evolutionary scheme of things, blacks are the closest to apes.
On the last page of his book, The Descent of Man, Charles Darwin expressed the opinion that he would rather be descended from a monkey than from a savage. In describing those with darker skin, he often used words like savage, low, and degraded to describe American Indians, pygmies, and almost every ethnic group whose physical appearance and culture differed from his own. He says racism had always been around, but Darwin gave it an air of scientific legitimacy. Another quote, one professor in the 1880s wrote, "I consider the Negro to be a lower species of man and cannot make up my mind to look upon him as a man and a brother, for the gorilla would then also have to be admitted into the family."
People like Christopher Columbus, Hernando Cortez, and Henry Morgan Stanley discovered these new lands, conquered them, abused the natives, and exploited the land's resources.
When European colonists first arrived on North American shores beginning in the 1500s, the land was already inhabited by Native Americans. The Spanish, French, and English encountered frequent conflicts with indigenous peoples.
In the early 16th century, from Chile in the south to Florida in the north, this non-white other was no more than vermin to be exterminated. The Dominican monk Bartolomé de las Casas was eyewitness to countless atrocities against the native populations. His account reads like a catalogue of genocide.
The mainland in the region known as Florida. The Spaniards murdered many, as is their custom, in order to strike terror into the hearts of these people. They made their lives an utter misery, treating them as so many beasts of burden. In another large town, the butchers put the whole town to the sword, young and old, chiefs and commoners, not even the children were spared. The butcher-in-chief arranged for a large number of natives in the area to have their noses, lips, and chins sliced from their faces. They were then sent away in unspeakable agony and all running with blood, to act as walking testimony to the great deeds and holy miracles performed by these dauntless missionaries of the Holy Catholic faith.
The things that Las Casas witnessed, particularly on Hispaniola or in Cuba, these incredible crimes, these incredible attacks on Indians, disembowelings and burnings and rapes and whatever else, I'm sure that that level of violence is something that you could have witnessed in different places in the 17th, the 18th century, in other parts of the Spanish Empire. But it was a peculiarly awful moment that Las Casas saw as the Spanish got to the Americas and tried literally to work the Indians to death.
To begin with, racial feeling can take simply the form of aversion, of dislike. But in the case of New World slavery, what it's doing is taking the form of domination, of exploitation, something much more coherent, something much more purposeful. It's not just a casual prejudice against people who are unlike ourselves. It's a determination to use those people who are unlike ourselves. So it's this that creates the more intense racial feeling that comes out of the widespread adoption of slavery in the plantations in the Americas.
The British don't become slave traders and slavers because they are racist. They become racist because they use slaves for great profit in the Americas.
Of the empire and the conquest of Jamaica. And that's when the English also began to perceive of themselves as part of a superior white race.
The British didn't introduce slavery to the Caribbean, but they took to it with enthusiasm. Traders bought slaves in Africa and then shipped them thousands of miles across the world.
Sugar was a back-breaking crop to harvest. The cane had to be cut down and then stripped of its foliage and then transported to the mill, often in intense, blazing heat. The plantations devoured slaves. Within 3 years of their arriving here, a third of them would be dead.
Treating human beings as beasts of burden made the owners of sugar plantations rich. This is the planter's house on the Good Hope estate, built in 1755. Its owner was 23 when he bought it. He became the wealthiest man in Jamaica, owning over 10,000 acres of land and 3,000 slaves. The sugar planters, known as the plantocracy, enjoyed enormous power. Each estate was its own little tyranny. And since slaves enjoyed no rights, the planters were free to behave as dictators. One was Thomas Thistlewood. He'd been a farm worker in England. Slavery turned him into a man of means. He fancied himself a man of letters too, and kept a diary.
Even though we all think we're familiar with the routine horrors of the slave trade, when you read what some of these slave owners did, it really does make your stomach heave. Here are 3 accounts of punishments meted out by Thistlewood in 3 months in 1756. Darby catched eating canes, had him well flogged and pickled, then made Hector shit in his mouth. Rubbed Hazard with molasses and exposed him naked to the flies all day and to the mosquitoes all night. Flogged Punch well, and then washed and rubbed in salt pickle, lime juice and bird pepper. Made Negro Joe piss in his eyes and mouth. When these slave owners went to church on a Sunday, they doubtless did so believing they were good Christian folk. They behaved as they did because they didn't regard their slaves as fellow human beings, but as their property to do with as they pleased.
Europeans believed that they were superior, and that it was their responsibility to bring their advancements to all corners of the world.
You don't believe that everyone is equal?
No, no. White people are so much higher than any other race.
Excuse me?
White is so much higher than any other race.
Europeans believed they had the responsibility and burden to bring commerce, Christianity, and civilization to Africa.
The British don't become slave traders and slavers because they are racist. They become racist because they use slaves for great profit in the Americas and devise a set of attitudes towards black people that justifies what they've done. Pay attention! And devise a set of attitudes towards black people that justifies what they've done.
The mammy, the pickaninny, the coon, the sambo, the uncle. Today there's little doubt that these images shape the most gut-level feelings about race.
F is for Felix, who won't do no work. He's lazy and shiftless and ready to shirk.
It's the ones that want free shit.
Same thing with the Americans here that want free shit. They're all the same, whether they're white, brown, or black. They're all the same. Their dad was worthless and their mom was worthless, and they want something for free. And they want something for free.
But I don't like him on the fact that he's black. Absolutely not.
What is it about black people that you don't like?
People thinking, specifically I am mentioning black people, thinking we owe them something, that the world owes them something.
They were from Africa and Europe. Some were enslaved, some were indentured servants. All of them were poor and exploited. Day after day, they struggled to survive the harsh world of Dutch New Amsterdam in the 1620s. Evening after evening, they gathered in taverns.
Taverns were places where you gathered to talk about your problems. And slaves would complain about their masters, and indentured servants would complain about their masters. So you had a lot of interracial bonding in these taverns.
You have people who indenture themselves. They promise their labor to a wealthy person for 7 years in order to pay off the price of coming to the New World.
Freedom was also the goal of black and white indentured servants in Chesapeake Tobacco Country. Since the early 1600s, black people had trickled into the area. Most were enslaved, others indentured servants. A few were free. John Punch was a black indentured servant. James Gregory, a Scotsman, and Victor, from the Netherlands, served with him on a small tobacco farm.
The status of indentured white servants and indentured Africans was very similar. They were both, of course, hired for a period of time, and both could become free. And let's also say that both were treated real bad. To be an indentured servant in this country meant that you literally didn't have any rights.
In this world, there's not much practical difference in terms of the oppression that they face. In some measure, that equality is an equality because these people can't be treated worse.
3 men on the same farm, doing the same labor, being harassed and oppressed on a comparable level, to the point that these 3 men chose to flee their owner.
Days later, they were captured and returned.
The 2 white men are sentenced to simply a number of years added to their indentures. For John Punch, the one black among these 3 men, his fate is infinitely worse. It's servitude for life.
For the rest of your life.
Now, there's no law that says that John Punch had to have been enslaved for life, but it was clear that 1640 is sort of the turning point, the beginning of the point where Africans are going to be treated differently as opposed to whites who are indentured servants.
By 1665, Maryland and New York had legalized slavery.
slavery would have started in Virginia, but it's likely within the first decade or so after the arrival, where indentured servitude found a way to morph into slavery.
Right.
And instead of someone serving for a period of time, it became a life sentence of sorts.
And in fact, one that you pass down to your descendants.
Correct.
So race is really by now a factor and becoming a more and more significant factor.
People are being distinguished now because they're black or white, and that whiteness is privileging in ever increasing and beneficial ways.
But I don't know if I ever considered myself white or thought about it. At one point I'm sure I did, but I don't really have any recollection of when it was, which I think is a total reflection of whiteness, of never having to sort of contemplate why people treat you the way they do.
To be white means to be a member of a dominant racial group in a society that I consider white supremacist. And to be white in a white supremacist society, not just a racist society, because that's almost too generic, to be white in a white supremacist society is to be able to have the luxury of oblivion, to be oblivious to the injustices, to be oblivious to racial privilege, to be oblivious, frankly, to one's own identity. So it is, in a sense, to be invisible to oneself.
Well, I think to be white in this culture means to deny the reality of racism. And it means to deny the privilege that we have as whites. Most people who are whites don't want to accept that they are privileged because they are.
They're all the same. Their dad was worthless and their mom was worthless, and they want something for free.
You know, the average American and Donald Trump, we do our best not to pay our share.
The New York Times reporting that Trump lost nearly $1 billion. This was back in 1995, and perhaps may have avoided paying federal income taxes for nearly 2 decades as a result of that 9-figure loss.
And they want something for free.
The reality is, this is part of our tax code. The man's a genius. He knows how to operate the tax code.
Do you pay federal income taxes?
Yes, I do.
So if Donald Trump is a genius for not paying federal income taxes, with all due respect, what does that make you?
I guess not that smart.
It's a delusional state. He wants us to.
What is it about society that disappoints you so much?